The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects. Robert and Linda Mitchell sat in molded plastic chairs outside the county morgue, their hands locked together between them. 2:17 a.m. glowed on the wall clock. The medical examiner's footsteps echoed somewhere down the hallway, getting closer, then fading away. This was the 4th time. 4 morgue visits in 3 years. 4 times the phone had rung in the middle of the night with a detective's careful voice asking if they had a son named Jake Mitchell. Approximately 6 feet tall, brown hair, last known to be living on the streets. 4 times they'd driven through empty streets to this building with its harsh lights and antiseptic smell that couldn't quite mask what lay beneath. 4 times it hadn't been him. Robert's thumb traced circles on the back of Linda's hand. Her breathing had gone shallow and ragged the way it always did in this waiting room. The vinyl seats stuck to their clothes. Neither of them spoke. They'd learned years ago that there were no words for moments like this, when you sat waiting to find out if your child was dead. The relief, when it came, never felt like relief. It felt like a temporary stay of execution. Because the call would come again, it always did. 7 years earlier, their kitchen had been full of sunlight and graduation announcements. Jake stood at the counter in his cap and gown, Linda fussing with his tassel while Robert tried to get a decent photo. Their daughter Emma sat at the table, rolling her eyes at the spectacle but smiling anyway. College acceptance letters covered the refrigerator door like battle honors. Stanford, UCLA, University of Washington. "We're so proud of you," Linda kept saying. She'd said it maybe 100 times that week. Jake had grinned, young and whole and full of tomorrow. "Thanks, Mom, but you might want to save some pride for when I actually do something." "You've already done something," Robert had told him. "You've become a man we're honored to know." The words tasted like ash now, sitting in that morgue waiting room. Robert wondered how many fathers had said similar things, never imagining where their sons would end up, never imagining fluorescent-lit hallways and the electric buzz of lights, and waiting to identify bodies. The first sign came home from college for Thanksgiving sophomore year. Jake had lost maybe 15 pounds. His eyes moved too fast, landing on things and darting away. He borrowed $200 for textbooks, which Robert handed over without question. By Christmas break, the weight loss was more pronounced. His jaw worked constantly, grinding invisible gum. He picked at his food. Slept until 2 in the afternoon, then stayed up all night playing video games, with the volume turned down low. Linda noticed the changes first. She was a pediatric nurse. She knew what to look for. But knowing and accepting are different countries with no bridge between them. By spring break, Jake had ceased coming home at all. The phone calls started that summer, always after midnight. Jake's voice thick and strange, asking for money, for help, for one more chance. Robert would grip the phone, his teacher's instincts warring with his father's heart. "What do you need the money for, son?" The line would go dead. Linda found the pipe in his old bedroom that July. She'd been putting away clean sheets, getting his room ready for a visit that never happened. The glass tube had rolled out from under the dresser, catching the sunlight. She'd stood there, holding it for 20 minutes, this tiny piece of evidence that shattered what remained of their denial. Robert came home to find her sitting on Jake's bed, the pipe in her lap, silent sobs racking her shoulders. The next 2 years blurred together in a sequence of crisis points and catastrophes. Money disappeared from Linda's purse. Robert's prescription medication vanished from the bathroom cabinet. Jake would appear without warning, staying for 3 days or 3 hours, sleeping on the couch and eating everything in the refrigerator, then leaving while they were at work. Once, Linda came home to find every piece of her jewelry gone. Not just the valuable pieces. Everything. including her grandmother's wedding ring, the one object in their house she'd told Jake 100 stories about. The ring that had survived the Depression and 2 world wars and a house fire in 1963. It was the ring that finally broke Robert. He'd come home from school that day to find Linda sitting at the kitchen table, her jewelry box open and empty. She wasn't weeping anymore. She'd moved beyond tears into some harder country. Robert felt something snap in his chest, like a wire pulled too tight. When Jake appeared 2 days later, Robert was waiting. "Where is it?" he said, not shouted, said. The quiet made it worse. Jake looked diminished somehow. His shoulders hunched. His face was covered in sores. "I needed it, Dad. You don't understand." "Your mother's ring," Robert said. "Her grandmother's ring." "I'll get it back," Jake promised. "I just need a little time. Get out. Dad, please. Get out." That's when Jake's fist went through the kitchen wall. The sound was like a gunshot in the confined space. White drywall dust exploded outward, coating the table, the floor, the family photos on the adjacent wall. Linda gasped and stumbled backward. From the stairs, 14-year-old Emma pressed herself against the wall, making herself as invisible as possible, her eyes wide with terror. "You don't know what I'm going through," Jake screamed. His hand was bleeding, but he didn't seem to notice. "You've never understood me. You sit here in your perfect house with your perfect life, and you judge me. You don't know what it's like." "Then help us understand," Robert said. His voice shook like a leaf in wind. "We love you. We're trying to—" "You don't love me. If you loved me, you'd help me." "We are helping you," Linda whispered. "We're trying to save your life." Jake laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "By letting me hit bottom? That's your plan. Watch me destroy myself and call it tough love?" He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. The front door slammed so hard the pictures rattled on the walls. They heard his car start, the engine revving too high, tires squealing as he pulled away. Emma came down the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. She looked at the hole in the wall, at her parents standing in the drywall dust like statues. "Is he coming back?" Linda opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "I don't know," Robert finally said. That was the last time they saw Jake for 18 months. The silence after Jake left was louder than any argument. Robert stood in the kitchen for a long time after the door slammed, staring at the hole in the wall. Dust settled on everything. Linda's hands trembled as she tried to sweep it up, but she kept missing spots, going over the same area again and again without seeing it. Emma retreated to her room without a word. That night, Robert found Linda sitting in Jake's bedroom, in the dark. She'd placed the battery-powered candle in the front window, the one they used during power outages. Its flame flickered against the glass, casting amber shadows on the curtains. Linda sat on Jake's bed, hands folded in her lap, staring at that tiny light. "What are you doing?" Robert asked. "So he knows the way home," she said. Her voice was barely audible. "In case he wants to come back." Robert wanted to say that Jake knew where they lived, that a candle wouldn't change anything, that they needed to protect themselves, to accept that their son might be gone forever. But Linda's face in the candlelight halted him. The skin around her eyes had gone papery and thin. Her mouth was a tight line. She looked like the only thing holding her together was that flame in the window. He sat down beside her. Neither of them spoke. The candle became a ritual. Every evening at dusk, Linda would turn it on. Every morning, she'd turn it off. 557 nights in a row. Robert counted them later when it was over. 557 nights of hoping. The calls from Jake came sporadically, sometimes months apart, sometimes twice in 1 week, always after midnight. Always incoherent or desperate, or both. "Mom, I need help. Dad, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll get clean. I promise. Just one more chance." Robert learned to steel himself against the sound of his son's voice. Learned to say no. Learned to hang up when Jake started screaming. But Linda couldn't. She'd stay on the phone for an hour, listening to Jake ramble, sometimes not even speaking, just being present on the other end of the line, while their son cycled through rage and grief and desperation. Their marriage began to fracture under the weight of it. Robert grew angry, not at Jake, at the situation, at God, at the unfairness of watching your child destroy himself while you stood helpless, at Linda's refusal to accept that Jake might be beyond saving. They fought in whispers, late at night, trying not to wake Emma. "You're enabling him," Robert would say. "I'm his mother. And I'm his father. But we can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved." Linda's eyes would flash. "So we just give up? We just let him die?" "I don't know," Robert would say. And that was the truth. He didn't know. Year 3 brought the arrest. Possession with intent to distribute. Robert and Linda sat in the courthouse while Jake shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit and chains. He looked like he weighed maybe 130 pounds. His face was covered in sores. He wouldn't look at them during the entire hearing. The judge offered treatment instead of prison. Jake accepted. He lasted 6 days in the facility before walking out. Year 4, they hired a private investigator. He found Jake living in a tent encampment under the interstate. Showed them photos. Robert looked at the pictures once, then put them in a drawer. He couldn't look at them again. Couldn't reconcile that skeletal stranger with the boy who used to help him grade papers, who used to throw a football in the backyard, who used to exist. Linda looked at them every night. Year 5, Pastor David started visiting. He'd show up once a month, always on a Saturday morning, always with coffee, from the good place downtown. He never preached, never offered easy answers. Just sat with them. Sometimes they'd talk about Jake, sometimes they'd talk about anything else. Sometimes they'd just sit in silence while the coffee went cold. One morning, Robert finally asked the question that had been eating at him. Why would God do this? We raised him right. We loved him. We did everything we were supposed to do. Pastor David had been silent for a long time. "I don't know why," he'd said finally. "I don't think faith gives us answers to that question, but it gives us something to hold on to when there are no answers." "That doesn't help," Robert said. "No," Pastor David agreed. "But it's true anyway." Linda found the support group at church. Every Tuesday night, in the basement room that smelled like coffee and old hymnals, 7 other parents whose children had chosen addiction. They sat in a circle and told stories that all sounded the same. Stories of stolen money and broken promises. Stories of morgue visits and court dates. Stories of hope that kept getting crushed and somehow kept reviving anyway. Linda came home from those meetings with her shoulders less hunched, not happier, but less alone. Robert started praying with Tom, a fellow teacher at his high school, every morning before first period in Tom's empty classroom. Tom's daughter was 3 years sober after a decade of heroin. He understood. He never told Robert it would get better. He just prayed with him. Simple prayers. God, help us endure this. God, give us strength for today. God, bring our children home. The church community raised $18,000 for Jake's 3rd rehab attempt without being asked, just passed an envelope. "Here," Pastor David had said, "for Jake. No strings, just love." Jake left that facility after 6 days, too. Year 6, a young woman appeared at their door, maybe 22, pregnant. She said Jake was the father, said he'd told her about them, said she wanted them to know they'd have a grandchild, even if Jake wasn't in the picture. Linda got her phone number, her due date, her promise to stay in touch. They never heard from her again. Emma went off to college angry. Angry at Jake for destroying their family, angry at her parents for letting him destroy it, angry at God for allowing any of it. She called home less and less. When she did call, the conversations were stilted, careful, full of things no one was saying. Robert and Linda went to counseling. A Christian therapist recommended by Pastor David. They sat on a beige couch in a windowless office that smelled like vanilla air freshener. The counselor was patient. She asked hard questions. She made them talk to each other instead of past each other. Slowly, painfully, they began to find their way back to each other. But the hole Jake left kept growing. Year 7, December 2:17 a.m., the 4th morgue visit. The medical examiner finally appeared. A tired-looking woman in her 50s. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell?" she said. They stood together. Robert felt Linda's hand tighten in his. "It's not your son," the woman said. "The deceased is African American, approximately 140 pounds. I'm sorry to bring you down here again." Relief and disappointment crashed over Robert in equal waves. "Thank you," he managed. They drove home in silence. Dawn was just starting to break, turning the sky gray at the edges. Robert pulled into their driveway. Neither of them moved to get out of the car. "Maybe we need to accept it," Robert said finally. The words felt like stones in his mouth. "Maybe we need to accept that we might never see him alive again." Linda stared straight ahead through the windshield. The candle burned in the front window, visible even in the growing light. "I can't," she whispered. "I know," Robert said. "I know." They sat there until the sun came up. 12 days later, Linda was making coffee. It was December 19th, 6:47 a.m. Robert sat at the kitchen table grating papers, his reading glasses perched on his nose. Emma was home for Christmas break, still asleep upstairs. The house was silent, except for the coffee maker's gurgle and the scratch of Robert's red pen. 3 soft knocks at the front door, not the doorbell. Just knuckles on wood, tentative, almost apologetic. Linda set down the coffee pot. Robert looked up from his papers. They glanced at each other. No one knocked at 6:47 in the morning. Linda walked to the door. She opened it. A man stood on their porch, maybe 90 pounds. His clothes hung off him like he was a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. Sores covered his face. His eyes were sunken, ringed with shadow. His breath came out in white clouds in the 28-degree air. He was shivering. Linda looked at him for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The recognition when it came was like being struck by lightning. "Mom," the stranger said in Jake's voice. "I'm tired. Can I come home?" Linda couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Her hands stayed frozen on the doorknob. 7 years of hoping and grieving and praying crashed down on her all at once. Her knees buckled slightly, her vision blurred. She simply stood there, wet tracks running down her face, looking at this ghost of her son. Robert appeared behind her. He saw Jake. His face went through a dozen expressions in the space of a heartbeat. Shock, disbelief, pain. Something that might have been joy. Then he stepped forward, pulled off his heavy winter coat and wrapped it around Jake's sharp shoulders. "Come inside, son," Robert said. His voice cracked. "Come inside." He guided Jake through the door. Linda still stood frozen, one hand on the doorknob, the other pressed to her mouth. Jake shuffled past her, wrapped in his father's coat, shivering so hard his teeth chattered. Emma came down the stairs in her pajamas, drawn by the voices. She halted halfway down when she saw Jake. Her hand went to the railing. She looked at her brother, at her parents, at the scene playing out in the entryway. The four of them stood there. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was Jake's ragged breathing and the soft hum of the heater and Linda's choked sobs. "I saw the light," Jake finally said. He was looking at the candle in the window. "I'd been walking past the house for 3 weeks. I saw the light every night. I thought maybe you'd still want me." Linda moved then. She crossed the space between them and wrapped her arms around her son. He crumpled against her, all 90 pounds of him, and wept. Robert's hand found Linda's shoulder. Emma came down the rest of the stairs slowly, cautiously, and stood beside her father. They stayed like that in the entryway, holding each other, holding Jake, while the morning light grew brighter outside and the candle kept burning in the window. The road back wasn't simple or straight. Pastor David helped them find a faith-based long-term residential program. 18 months. The church helped with the cost again, this time anonymously. Jake went willingly. He was so tired of running, so tired of dying a little more each day. The family therapy was brutal. Sitting in a counselor's office with gray carpet and motivational posters on the walls, finally saying out loud all the things that had broken between them. Jake's confession that he'd walked past their house 17 times over 3 weeks, seeing the candle, wanting to knock but convinced they'd turn him away. Linda's admission that she'd been taking sleeping pills for 2 years just to get 4 hours of rest. Emma's voice breaking as she described feeling invisible for 7 years while Jake consumed all the oxygen in the family. Robert's anger that he'd buried so deep it had nearly poisoned him. The counselor made them listen to each other. Really listen. It hurt worse than the years of silence. There were setbacks, scares, moments when Jake called from the program, his voice shaking, saying he couldn't do it. Moments when Linda would find Robert sitting in the garage with his head in his hands. Moments when Emma would ask if they thought Jake would actually make it this time, or if this was just another false start. They learned not to make promises. They learned to take it one day at a time. They learned that faith doesn't mean certainty. It means showing up even when you're terrified. Month 6 of Jake's program, a young woman contacted them through the facility. She had a 3-year-old daughter. She said Jake was the father. She'd disappeared after that visit during year 6 because she'd been using too, and she was ashamed. But she was clean now, working, ready to co-parent if Jake wanted to be involved. Jake met his daughter on a supervised visit. Her name was Lily. She had Jake's eyes and his stubborn chin. He held her hand and wept and told her he was sorry for not being there. Lily, who was 3 and didn't understand any of it, asked if he wanted to play blocks with her. They played blocks for 2 hours. The day Jake completed the program, Robert and Linda drove to the facility to pick him up. He'd gained 40 pounds. The sores had healed. His eyes were clear. He looked young again, not the same as before. The years had left their mark, but alive, present, here. He moved into a sober living house, got a job washing dishes, started attending meetings. Twice a week, he volunteered at the facility that had saved him, sharing his story with new arrivals, offering hope to people who thought they were beyond saving. Sundays became sacred. Dinner at Robert and Linda's house, always at 6. Jake would arrive early and help Linda cook. Robert would put on football. Emma, when she came home from college, would set the table. They'd sit together and eat and talk about ordinary things. Work, weather, Lily's daycare drawings. They didn't talk about the 7 years very often, not because they were pretending it didn't happen, but because they were learning to exist beyond it. Learning that redemption doesn't erase the past. It just gives you a new story to tell alongside the old one. 2 years after Jake came home, he got a tattoo on his forearm, a tiny flame. Underneath it, in simple script, "The light still burns." Linda wept when she saw it. Good tears this time. Every other weekend, Lily stayed with Robert and Linda. They'd converted Jake's old room into a space for her. Pink walls, a toddler bed, toys everywhere. She called them Grandma and Grandpa. She didn't know the story yet. Someday she would. But for now, she was just a little girl who loved her grandparents and her daddy, and playing blocks. 3 years after that knock on the door, Jake stood in the same ICU waiting room, where Robert and Linda had spent so many agonizing hours. But this time he wore a volunteer badge. This time he was the one offering hope. A father sat in the plastic chairs, head in his hands. His son was in detox, going through withdrawal, screaming for drugs. The doctor said it could take days. The father looked like he'd aged a decade in a week. Jake sat down beside him, said nothing for a while, then, softly, "I know this is hell, but it's not the end." The father looked up. "Who are you?" Jake smiled. "I'm someone whose parents never gave up lighting a candle in the window. Sometimes deliverance comes quickly. Sometimes it takes 7 years and 557 nights of hoping, when hope seems foolish. Faith isn't a guarantee of the outcome we want. It's just the strength to keep showing up even when the darkness feels permanent. And sometimes, on a cold December morning, when you've run out of everything except that one flame in the window, your prodigal son comes home.